Hey guys, welcome to the final feast. I'm Natasha Diamond. I love true crime, I love baking, and I have a weird fascination with what convicts choose as their last meal on death row. So that's what I do here. I cook their last meal and I tell their story. The recipe links will be in the description box below, so you can try it out and let me know what you think in the comments. Now, let's turn up the heat on this delusional mofo, Timothy McVeigh.
The chaos in downtown Oklahoma City did indeed resemble Beirut after what police believe to be a 1,200-pound car bomb ripped through the 9-story federal building shortly after 9 o'clock. At least 50 children were in a daycare center on the second floor.
Those sketches were released as rescue workers worked their way through the wreckage of the Murrah Federal Building, looking for survivors among the close to 200 people.
Timothy McVeigh was an American domestic terrorist whose hatred of the federal government was so great that it led him to commit what is still to this day known as the deadliest act of domestic terrorism in US history. The Oklahoma City bombing led to the deaths of 168 people and 680 more were injured. But who was Timothy McVeigh and what led to the devastating events that took place on that fateful day in 1995? Grab your cuppa, sit back and relax while I make my very own version of Timothy's last meal on death row, which was 2 pints of mint chocolate chip ice cream. A very simple, but let me tell you, very delicious one for you today. On the 19th of April 1995, around 9 a.m, first responders were called to a horrific scene. The Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City was on fire, with a third of the building eventually being destroyed. The blast radiated across 16 blocks, damaging over 300 surrounding buildings and caused what felt like an earthquake up to 5 miles away. At first, onlookers believed that there had been a gas explosion, others an atomic bomb, but officials quickly established that it was likely a terrorist attack and the building was immediately evacuated. Within the Alfred P. Murrah building was a daycare centre, so many of the civilians under attack had the added trauma of wondering whether their child had fallen victim to this catastrophic explosion. As a rescue mission commenced to save the hundreds trapped in the building, investigators began searching for the culprits responsible for the attack with no time to spare. Their first big lead emerged when a member of the public reported seeing the rear axle of a truck landing on the road a mere 200 yards from the bomb site. It was clear to investigators that the explosion had been caused by a truck bomb. Fortunately, the rear axle housing contained the identification number. This meant that the vehicle could be traced right back to its manufacturer. It was derived that the truck was a Ryder truck, which had been rented from a company in Junction City, Kansas. As the 2-week rescue mission of the Alfred P. Murrah building continued, police were hot on the trail of the monster, or monsters, that caused this horrific event. The rental documentation showed that the truck was hired out 4 days prior by a man named Robert D. Kling. An employee was able to give a detailed description of this Robert fellow and the friend that he was with at the time. A police sketch of the two men was quickly created and released to the public. The day after the blast, on the 20th of April, police officers took this sketch and canvassed the entire area looking for Robert Kling and his friend. Eventually, a receptionist at the Dreamland Motel recognised the image of what was believed to be Robert, stating that he had pulled up in a Ryder truck and rented one of the rooms at the motel. However, this man didn't check in using the name Robert, but a Mr. Timothy McVeigh. Shockingly, a quick search of Timothy on the police database showed that he was already in police custody after being arrested the previous day, 25 miles north of Oklahoma City. Turns out that less than 90 minutes after the Oklahoma City bombing, Timothy was pulled over in a yellow 1977 Mercury Marquis by a state trooper for not having a license plate. He was said to have looked clean-cut, with short hair and a military-type appearance. The state trooper noticed a bulge in Timothy's jacket and he was arrested for carrying a concealed weapon. Once Timothy's Robert Kling alias had been uncovered in connection with the Oklahoma City bombing, he gave investigators his name, rank and serial number, but refused to discuss the matter any further. On the 21st of April, he was arrested and charged with the Oklahoma City bombing. It wasn't long before investigators found another lead in the case which helped them to track down Timothy's accomplice. His driving licence was registered to a property in Michigan. This property was owned by James Nichols, whose brother, Terry Nichols, was a close friend of Timothy's since their time spent together in the army. Terry was known to share the same anti-government beliefs as Timothy, so as an arrest warrant was issued, Terry handed himself into the police that same day. Before we delve any deeper into the details of what happened on that fateful day in April, let's talk a bit about who Timothy was and what caused him to have such a hatred in the government that he would put so many innocent lives in danger. Timothy James McVeigh was born on the 23rd of April 1968 in Lockport, New York. He was the middle child of three and only son to his Irish parents, Noreen and William McVeigh. Eventually, when Timothy was only 10 years old, his parents divorced and the children were told to choose who they would like to live with. Timothy blamed his mum for the split and chose to live with his dad in Pendleton, New York. He was described as an outgoing, playful child, but became withdrawn and shy as a teenager. Timothy himself said that his father regularly left him home alone and he had very few memories of any interaction with either parent. This wasn't helped by the fact that he was badly bullied in school, which later in life he compared to the US government being the ultimate bully. He got into computers and hacking and was eventually introduced to firearms by his grandfather. This became a passion of his throughout his teens, and he was even known to take guns into school to try and impress his peers. In his senior year, Timothy was named Most Promising Computer Programmer and Most Talkative, the latter a joke by peers because he rarely interacted with anyone. Timothy took a job as a security guard whilst also attending community college for a short period of time before dropping out. He joined the army in 1988 at around 20 years old, where he fully embraced the disciplined lifestyle required of a soldier. It was there where Timothy bonded with roommate Michael Fortier and platoon leader Terry Nichols over their shared distrust of the federal government and intense passion about gun rights. It was at this time that Timothy's support for white supremacist groups became evident. At one point, Timothy was reprimanded by the military for buying a White Power t-shirt at a KKK rally in objection to black servicemen who wore Black Power t-shirts. In 1991, Timothy was sent to Kuwait to serve alongside thousands of other American soldiers in the Gulf War. Although this was an extremely traumatic time for him, at one point describing himself as a sacrificial lamb, Timothy thrived and was awarded the Bronze Star for Valor. Because of this, he was invited to try out for the Special Forces when he returned home from war. This had always been the ultimate goal since joining the army. However, due to being physically unprepared following the war, Timothy was unsuccessful. Eventually, he lost his focus and was discharged in December of 1991. Coming home, Timothy was given a hero's welcome, but found it difficult to adjust back to normal life. He expected to settle down with a good job, but ended up doing odd jobs and falling back into security work to make ends meet. He built up a reputation around the neighbourhood as a racist and even joined the KKK for a brief time, but his membership ended as they focused too much on race and not enough on the Second Amendment. He strongly believed that people had the right to keep and bear arms with little to no gun control. It was said that he talked regularly about his hatred of the government to his sisters and co-workers, and even wrote to the local newspaper a handful of times to voice his opinion. At this point, he became more and more interested in conspiracy theories, including the Rockefeller family and the United Nations. It is said that two major events occurred in the early 1990s which triggered Timothy to incite violence towards the US government. The first of which occurred in Idaho in 1992. White supremacist Randy Weaver was caught in an 11-day standoff with the FBI after being suspected of selling illegal firearms. Amidst the chaos, Weaver's wife, son and a deputy US Marshal were killed. Soon after this, Timothy left home in search of a free state to live in. For the next 2 years, he travelled through 40 states. It was during this time that the second major triggering event took place. A religious group in Waco, Texas, called the Branch Davidians, were under siege by federal agents for the suspected manufacturing of illegal machine guns. They believed that the end of the world was coming soon and that there would be a battle with the federal government. The ATF and FBI raided the Branch Davidians' compound, which led to a 51-day standoff and the compound engulfing in flames. 76 men, women and children were killed, including 4 federal officials. During the standoff, Timothy drove to Waco and laid base close to the siege, where he sold bumper stickers in support of the Branch Davidians and spoke to a reporter about his distrust of the government. During the 2 years that Timothy had been travelling around the US, he had become a well-known face on the gun show circuit, following them from show to show. He He was known to sell the racist white supremacist book The Turner Diaries and other paraphernalia. He also spent time visiting his old friends from the army with similar political views. Michael Fortier in Arizona, and then Terry Nichols and his brother on their farm in Michigan. Timothy was becoming more and more paranoid, so in 1994, when Congress passed the assault weapons ban, he was certain that more raids like the one in Waco were bound to happen and that he'd be targeted. It was at this point that Timothy McVeigh declared war on the US government. He convinced friends Michael and Terry to help him launch his attack and decided that a truck bomb would be the best and most effective way to accomplish the most devastation. Timothy and Terry began stockpiling ammonium nitrate fertilizer. As mixed with fuel, this was a cheap and effective way to build a truck bomb. Timothy spent time scouting out multiple federal buildings before deciding on the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building to be his battleground. It housed 14 federal agencies, including the Secret Service, DEA and ATF. He chose the 19th of April for his attack, as this is known as Patriots' Day in the right-wing anti-government movement. It was the day the first shot was fired in the American Revolution. As the plan was coming into motion and becoming more real, Michael got cold feet and decided not to take part anymore. After this, the timeline goes as follows. In the March of 1995, Timothy created the fake driver's license under the alias Robert D. Kling. On the 14th of April, he purchased the 1977 Mercury Marquis from a used car dealer in Junction City, Kansas, using the fake driver's license. Then he rented the Ryder truck the following day. On the 16th, Timothy and Terry drove the truck down to Oklahoma City and parked several blocks away from the Murrah building. They removed the license plates from the car and left a note saying, "Not abandoned, please do not tow, will move by April 23rd, needs battery cable." On the 18th, the two men assembled the bomb in the truck. Then at the very last minute, Terry got cold feet and backed out. He stated that at this point Timothy became enraged and threatened him to keep quiet. On the morning of the 19th of April 1995, just before 9 a.m, Timothy McVeigh drove the Ryder truck close to the Murrah building and lit two fuses within a few minutes of each other. At 9:01, he exited the truck and headed towards the Mercury, parked a few blocks away, as the bombs detonated. As Timothy fled the scene, he left a wake of destruction and devastation behind him. The initial rescue operation became a search for bodies that lasted 2 weeks. Of the 168 that died, 19 were children and 680 others were injured. Timothy was assessed by psychologists and psychiatrists, and it was determined that he didn't have any mental or emotional disorders, so pleading insanity was off the table. On the 10th of August 1995, a federal grand jury charged Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols with 11 counts of murder and conspiracy. This included 8 counts of murder, based on the 8 law enforcement officers that were killed. Michael Fortier was able to take a plea deal in which he was sentenced to 12 years and testified against his 2 friends and co-conspirators. He is now part of a witness protection program. The trial began in Denver, Colorado on the 24th of April 1997, 2 years after the Oklahoma City bombing. McVeigh admitted to his actions, but argued that he acted in self-defense against an oppressive federal government. In his deluded state, he felt that this horrid act of violence was a justified response to the violence perpetrated by the government against its own people. Of course, his defense attorney knew that this wouldn't hold up in court, so argued that the 3 men weren't the only ones involved in the crime and that they were part of a larger conspiracy. Both men were found guilty of all charges. Terry Nichols was sentenced to life in prison, while Timothy McVeigh was sentenced to death. On the 11th of June 2001, McVeigh was put to death by lethal injection. He maintained his beliefs and never expressed any regret or remorse. For his last meal, he chose 2 pints of mint chocolate chip ice cream. If you've made it this far, then thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think in the comments section. I'll be serving up more true crime juice like this next week, so if you're feeling generous, hit that like button and hit that subscribe button if you don't want to miss out. Until next time, enjoy every meal as if it was your last.